Well, welcome to our conversation with Pat O'Brien, Professor Emeritus in Financial Accounting and longtime colleague at the School of Accounting and Finance. I'm Christine Wiedman, Professor of Financial Accounting, and I'm also joined by Elizabeth Demers, the Graduate Officer of the PhD program, Changling Chen, the Associate Director of Scholarship, and Ranjini Jha, the Professor of Finance. Pat has had an impressive career spanning 35 plus years. She's held positions at a number of universities, including MIT, Michigan, York University, and she's been a key player at the School of Accounting and Finance at the University of Waterloo since 2000. During her time here, she's helped to shape the research environment, particularly through her involvement in the PhD program as a teacher, program director, grad officer, and PhD student supervisor. She has presented her research at universities around the world, and her contributions to research were recognized by the Canadian Academic Accounting Association through the Haim Falk Award for Distinguished Contribution to Accounting Thought. She served on numerous editorial boards and was the editor-in-chief of a Contemporary Accounting Research, one of the top journals in our field. We're very fortunate to have her back with us today to share her insights. So Pat, we have a few questions for you, and I'd like to start with this one. What has been the most exciting part of your research career?
Well, okay, first I want to thank you for that lovely introduction. That was really beautiful. A tiny correction, apropos of the group that's assembled here to talk with me today, that I am Professor Emerita and not Emeritus. And I'm so happy that my women colleagues decided that this was a good thing to acknowledge my retirement from the active faculty roles. So thank you again for the introduction. When you ask me what is the most exciting part of my research career, it's a little bit like asking somebody, which is your favorite child, you know? And fortunately, I only have one child, so that one is easy for me to answer. But if you have more than one, this could be a difficult one, a tricky one to answer. But I think reflecting on what I've really enjoyed the most about being a researcher is learning. I think that the thing for me that makes research really fun and opportunity always to learn new things. And it's every part of the research process, from formulating questions, you know, what do I want to know? What do I want to learn? Figuring out how can I learn that and so forth, to, you know, even more mundane things. For example, when Maureen McNichols and Joey Lynn and I were working on the paper about analyst impartiality. That paper, I mean, what I figured out is that we really were looking at timing as an issue. And once you start thinking about timing as an issue, it leads you immediately to hazard models. And to that point, I knew nothing about hazard models. I really had done nothing with them at all. I'd never taken any courses. I'd never done anything like that. But it gave me the opportunity to learn about a brand new thing that I'd never done before. And so, you know, dive in. I'm very fortunate that at that time I was already at the University of Waterloo, and we had, he's now retired as well, but we had like the guy, Jerry Lawless, here at Waterloo, who that's what he does, you know, that's his life work, over in the statistics, in the math faculty in statistics. And so I had, you know, great resources, and it was just, you know, okay, here's my sandbox. I get to learn. I think that's really the exciting thing for me is that it's learning.
Yeah, it is. It's a great career from that perspective. And I think I learned about hazard models from your paper. So thank you for that.
I don't think you're the only one. I think I had a referee that we had a referee that you know, kept raising issues that, you know, okay, well, that's what a hazard model
does. Yeah.
was the answer, was the right answer. And so,
but it is a neat part of the profession that we do learn from we hopefully learn from each other too. Yeah. So I'm going to pass it over to Chang Ling.
Okay, so Pat, now here is part of the question that I will ask you to tell us some more of your stories. After being an accounting academic for more than 35 years, you have influenced many young students and scholars around you, and I was one of them. And many years ago, I was a PhD student and first met you at the AAA Doctor Consortium. I'm not sure if you still remember it. And later, I took the job at UWaterloo, and now we became colleagues and ever since. And you have impressed me as a very eloquent and graceful storyteller. So, may I ask you to share your stories about what motivated you to dive into this amazing academic career, and how did you feel in your early days of conducting accounting research?
Okay, well, these are two different stories, really, because I didn't start out by any stretch of the imagination thinking I was going to get a PhD in accounting. I had already, in my mind, turned my back on the academic career. My math advisor at Cornell had encouraged me to think about a PhD, and I thought, no, PhDs end up driving taxis and not, and living kind of hand to mouth, and I didn't think that was the thing for me. I went off to get an MBA thinking, okay, well, I need to make money, and so I better get an MBA. In the course of which I realized that the things that were interesting to me were being taught in PhD courses, and the things that I was taking in my MBA classes, the jobs I was interviewing as an MBA student, and the opportunities that were available to me with an MBA were things that I thought would probably be interesting or fun for about 6 months or so, and then I would be bored out of my skull. And so I, had professors there who were encouraging me in my ideas about perhaps pursuing a PhD. I saw that, it seemed like a viable option. And although it wasn't math, I could, still keep learning. So it was the opportunity to remain a student for the rest of my life, really, that was the appealing thing and caused me to go into academics. The fact that it was accounting and not some other field, I think, is just a function of the faculty members there who were encouraging me to consider that. So that's how I got into being an accounting academics. Maybe a bit different from most people because I didn't have an accounting background prior to getting into the PhD program. And then what was your other question? You asked me about whether
reflect on your early days of doing accounting research. Any interesting story that you want to share with us?
Well, let me think. I think, like most young academics, my overriding sentiment or feeling was one of panic, that I wasn't doing enough, that I wasn't writing enough, that I didn't have, that I wasn't working long enough hours and, enough weekends, and God forbid I should ever take a holiday of any sort and so forth. So it was, and I don't think that sets me apart from any other person that starts off in an academic career. I think it's hard to just kind of ease into and feel confident because the clock is ticking. The evaluations are frequent. They're not often laudatory, no matter what you've done. There's always something that somebody can find fault with. And so it feels tenuous always. So it was this feeling of panic. That was my early years. At the same time, I was enjoying opportunities. I had great colleagues. I was working with really, really smart people. I could learn from them. And that feeling, that part of being an academic when I was, in those first years was I guess, more than compensated because I didn't leave.
Actually, I like your stories because I think lots of young people share the common feelings that you're talking about, the panic, the hard start, and then have the determination being a student the whole life. That's very amazing. My next question is about our days together when we were commuting between Toronto and Waterloo for countless hours on that Greyhound buses. So what I have seen from all the past time was you had always been working on the bus, no matter it was in early mornings or late evenings. How did you manage to do that? You were always on time. How did you manage your time?
First, Christine will tell you this too. And my daughter complains about me being on time because I'm not just on time, I'm half an hour early. So, I was always waiting in line, you remember, for the bus that was leaving at 7:15, and I was usually there before 7. So it's not a problem for me because I'm a morning person. But as for the work, okay, a couple of things here. I don't ever want to take a Greyhound bus again. It was, for me, a useful thing to be able to get to campus and back and not have to have myself just staring at the road for these hours. I am fortunate that I can work in a moving vehicle. If you were observing me closely, Chengling, you probably noticed that I wasn't only working. I did my Sudoku every morning before I got into work, and so there was a little bit of downtime in that. I think that one of the other not wonderful things about that commuting time, when you and I were doing it in those early days, there was no Wi-Fi on those buses. Even when they got Wi-Fi on the buses, not all of the buses had them, and it was pretty sporadic. And it would go, every time you passed another cell phone tower, it would stop. So the bad thing is you weren't connected. The good thing was you weren't connected. It was distraction free. I find email incredibly distracting. And so, here's a time when all you can do is, do whatever, choose a task, put your mind to it, focus, and do it, right? And so whether it was writing a memo or reading the paper for the seminar that was happening later that day, here was uninterrupted time. No phone was going to ring. Well, very few people had my cell phone number, and nobody was going to call me at 7:15 anyway. So, it was really distraction-free time, and that is precious. It's hard to come by. So.
Yeah, I just want you to know that it was really lifting for me during those days. Thank you.
So Pat, I know you've interacted with standard setters for a lot of your career, including as a member of the Academic Advisory Committee to the Canadian Accounting Standards Board. How has your research informed standard setting, and how do you think that other researchers can influence standard setting activities with their research?
All right. How has my research influenced standard setters? Well, of course, in my view, not enough. I wish that they could take from what I tried to convey some understanding of the way that users, analysts in particular, but not only analysts, employ accounting information and what they need from the accounting information, as well as what they don't need from accounting information. The notion that what we should be in the business of is providing trustworthy information for other people to hold accountable the managers who are managing the resources of the company, was, I think, not very well appreciated. I think there's, you know, you can't act as if all standard setters are alike. They're not. And certainly there were some who were more receptive to that message than others, I felt. I think that I had the great fortune of being involved with the Academic Advisory Council in the period, pretty long period, when the International Accounting Standards Board, as well as the FSB in the US, were rethinking their conceptual frameworks. Because I think it's in the concepts that academics really can provide the most help and assistance, can offer the most that would be useful for them to think about. When we get into an organization, a board like the Accounting Academic Advisory Council in Canada, you know, the likelihood that on any particular issue, we will have real expertise in a standard. I'm thinking, for example, we had a standard on insurance companies, right? Accounting by insurance companies. And, you know, I know a little bit, I don't know a lot. Most of it is from studying hazard models, you know, back that I was describing before. I know people who are experts in it, but we didn't happen to have those people on this academic advisory council. The best I could do was to say, here are some people that you ought to be talking to. Mm-hmm. And so back to the conceptual framework project, I felt that that was something where we really did have a lot to say, a lot of input. And, you know, whether they took all of my advice in particular, well, of course, that's never going to happen. So that was the most interesting little bit of it. Christine, I think you asked also how other people can get involved or something?
Yeah, how can they, I mean, I guess, should academics be involved with standard setters? And if so, you know, what are different ways they can play a role?
Yeah, I mean, for sure they should, because I believe that we have a perspective that's very useful. I think increasingly standard setters are understanding that fact that we have interesting things, interesting insights and something to offer, and also appreciating how to and when to ask the questions. You know, we can't, the gestation time for our research is such that by the time they've got their preliminary draft out, that's not the time to start asking academics for questions, because they're not going to be able to construct research projects and get them to completion in the time standard setters would want to have answers. What we can do and have done, I think, is provide very early stage advice on what kinds of questions you want to be asking, providing pointers to where in the literature there is relevant information for them to understand, where people have already done work. I'm thinking, for example, of a current topic is that of goodwill and business combinations and so forth. You know, there's enormous amounts of work on business combinations and about valuations and about performance and so forth. But putting that into context for them so that without having to read, you know, decades worth of finance and accounting journals to find all of this stuff, they can figure out how that research informs their questions. I think that that is a very valuable role. You know, sometimes it happens in comments. I had a project with Andy Bauer and Umar Saeed who's at CPA Canada, where we just started out writing a comment letter. This was on the conceptual framework project. And, you know, I believe that it was well received at the board, but in addition, we kind of turned it into an opinion piece that got published in Accounting in Europe later. So I think it's a good thing to engage. It's informative for standard setters, but it also can generate some ideas for yourself as well.
Yeah, I think it can work both ways, which is positive. And my sense is that over time, standard setters are, and maybe this is in part because they talk about evidence-based standard setting. They do seem very willing to turn to the literature, the academic literature, and say, okay, well, what has been studied here, and how can that inform us? So, to the extent that we can help them understand and collate some of those findings, that can be a positive too.
I think that's the very important part, is just because, helping them to figure out what the takeaways are from the research that are relevant for their questions, for their interests. So.
Yeah, and I'm sure that has also influenced your textbook, which Chengling has another question about, I believe.
Yes. So I have a question on your recently co-authored accounting theory textbook. By the way, it is a very popular textbook that has been adopted by many universities for their teaching of the theory course. In accounting fields, there has been a well-observed gap between the accounting practice and accounting research. And the accounting theory course intends to narrow the gap. And in your view, Pat, what is the accounting theory course for the education of the undergraduate and master accounting students in terms of helping them to narrow the gap?
Well, okay, thanks for asking about the book. I was so honored when Bill Scott asked me if I would co-author this edition of his very, very successful textbook. There's no question about it, Bill's textbook, and I was helping with this edition. That said, it was really, again, a great learning experience for me, not having written that kind of textbook. I'd been co-author on some smaller things, but that sort of textbook. And actually digging into it and seeing the brilliance of what he put together originally. I think that for undergraduates particularly, master's students perhaps as well, who are aiming for careers in accounting, whether it is a management accounting, whether they're going to be preparers of financial statements, whether they're going to be using it in internal contexts, whether they're going to be auditors or some other kind of accounting profession. This idea that the accountant's role in a market economy is to create the trust in information that allows markets to do what they need to do and contracts to do what they need to do, for people to get information that they can trust. That is sort of the premise of the book. First, it has to lay out, however, why it's a problem. Why might you not trust the information that the manager gives you if they're following accounting standards and so forth? What is the need for accountants to do something beyond what the manager might be doing? I think that idea and the sort of step-by-step building up of that idea through, okay, here's the framework that we've got in the market economy. Here's the need for the information. Here's why the information might not be trustworthy. Here's how we can address that issue. Some various ways we can address that issue, and ways that we might still need some other solutions. So I think that first of all, that it's a Waterloo homegrown product, I love. I don't think that there exists another book in the world that lays out that framework, that role of the accountant for society as a whole, for the market economy as a whole, and puts it in context. I think that so many of our other courses focus on how to do things, how to account for things, and they do raise these problems and these questions, but I think that actually articulating what the accountant's role is in the whole picture, the big picture, is the real triumph of that book. And so I was just super, super pleased to be a part of it. I don't know if I answered your whole question. Tell me.
Yeah, that's some very insightful response to the question. And as a follow-up of this theory education issue, a follow-up question is, what about after students' graduation? Let's say we teach them the big picture about the supply and demand of the financial reporting information in market economies, and it helps the economy. And then with that knowledge, with that big picture, how will it help students in their future career development?
Well, I hope that it will make them better and more thoughtful accountants who take their role to be something other than, this is the task I've got today, and this is what my paycheck, who pays my paycheck, to think about these issues of integrity of the system and the process, the role that society, the value that society imbues to what they're doing. I hope that makes them to be better accountants. That's a hope.
And we all hope that they can be better accountants and who can also be supportive of the accounting research. That will be a great reward. So I'll pass the next question to Liz. I think Liz has questions for you too.
I do, thank you. And thanks for the review and reminder about your book. I'm looking forward to actually rereading it. It's been too long. So my question relates to some trends that we may be seeing in the research dimension. And a few things are that it would seem that our junior colleagues are being put under increasing pressure to produce higher and higher volumes of research. And in addition, there are many calls from different factions us to produce research that is of greater practical relevance. And we saw that even this week with the awarding of the Nobel Prize for auction design. Some of the greatest contributions of those two eminent scholars were actually in the practical domain and implementation of auctions. And so it's not unique to accounting, but these are two potentially important trends. And I'm just wondering what your perspective is. Do you agree that they are trends? Are they? What are the implications of that for our scholarly pursuits and what academic researchers?
Okay. Certainly the focus on volume, having a certain quantity of articles and maybe articles that have to be in particular specific outlets, that's something that has evolved and in my view, in a very bad direction over the course of my career. I recall one instance very early in my career where someone actually gave a number of articles that one was supposed to have. I think that's a commonplace now. And the articles one should have published in order to get tenure is the rest of that sentence. Sorry for being incomplete there. That's a commonplace now. I think it's a very, very bad commonplace. I think but I don't think this is on, researchers, especially not the untenured researchers, because they get into a job and they're told this is what the standard is. There's absolutely nothing else for them to do but to try to meet the standard of what they're told. So this is all on deans, directors, senior faculty who are in the position of making these determinations. I've spent a bit of time in some of my inside the university service doing tenure and promotion related things at various levels of the university, right on up to the university level. What is it called? Appointments? No, sorry, it's the, never mind, I can't remember the name of it. There's some university level thing where you'd sit, I would sit on the tenure and promotion committee of a faculty, not other than arts, other than our own faculty. You learn a lot there. One of the things that I particularly learned is that whoever wrote the policy for the University of Waterloo did a good job of emphasizing in there that the quality of the research should always dominate over quantity of research. And although discussions would sometimes veer into, well, there aren't that many publications, or I would have expected by this time a second book or something like that, that policy allowed the conversation to be steered back to, that is not the point. The point is the quality of the research. And so I think when schools or departments put in these, you know, you need to have this many top tier articles as their own internal standard, they do a great disservice, because what that motivates in young scholars is, I need to churn out articles, not I need to work on really interesting things. And that is a losing, it's a downward spiral, right? To what's the minimum I have to do to get into one of these journals, instead of how can I answer this really interesting question? How can I best answer it? And I think that the mindset that those kinds of, I just really hope that deans, department heads, whoever's responsible for these decisions can rethink that, I think, really horrible, horrible precedent that's been set. So that's it on volume. I'm not in favor, especially of specific criteria for you know, creating a volume of work. I'm sorry, Liz. There was another piece, and I've lost it.
Yep. The second issue is the calls for us to do much more practice-oriented or practical oriented research that can contribute to actual business, as opposed to just feeding the ivory tower.
You know, I don't know if that's very new. I certainly recall that being a criticism easily in the early 1990s, if that's long enough ago for you. It's, well, first of all, I mean, we're accounting researchers. If we're in a business discipline, there's no, I mean, we can't be too tremendously theoretical, because, you know, it would no longer be accounting. It would be math, or it would be, you know, theoretical economics, or it would be something else, right? We can't really deal in complete abstraction. We need to have the context of our discipline as a something underlying this. I'm going to get back to something I said in relation to Christine's question. I think as well that many more people in the business world, certainly standard setters, I think among them, but in addition to those, more people in the business world are understanding that research happens in increments. We don't solve one problem for all time with one paper. And that is just not the nature of research. It's not the nature of research in any field. And so having, well, okay, perhaps in math, if you solved Fermat's last theorem, yeah, okay, you've solved it and it's done. That isn't the context in which we're working. So I think there is a need to have your research addressing interesting questions and not chasing small minutiae that are truly of interest only to a small group of academics. But we're going to need some of that research that's of interest only to the small group of academics as a piece of advancing the whole project. So I think it's, you know, thinking about increments to knowledge and conveying research as the accumulation, conveying research to people not academics who are interested in these practical applications, conveying the accumulation of increments to them in pieces that they can get. You know, those are two different skills, and not everybody's going to have expertise in both or both of those skill sets at in their hands. But we as an academic community, I think, have those skills, and we as an academic community can make that case that yeah, we do work on research that's relevant to practice. You kind of have to follow a trail of increments to get to the answers that you want. You have to know how to read the research. And that's what getting a PhD is all about, I suppose. So.
Okay, great, thank you. And I think one of the ways that we do that is through our students, for example, through your book in the course that Cheng Ling is teaching, and my own past in teaching MBAs and executive MBAs. They're actually interested in understanding what we research when you package it as you described in a manner that is relevant to them. So thank you for that. And I am going to pass you to Ranjini next.
Hi, Pat. Lovely chatting with you. And this question for you is, what advice do you have for tenure-track faculty who are struggling with work-life balance, particularly women with young children? Has your perspective on this changed over time?
All right. Well, my advice is going to be, don't do what I did. I was 43 years old when my daughter was born. I spent my late 20s and 30s being in that panic that I described to you before, of getting more done and so forth. I don't believe that my early career was characterized by work-life balance. I certainly now see the benefit of work-life balance, and I also see the difficulty of maintaining it, because I wouldn't have been in the position at age 43 to, I guess, ride out having had a child and then subsequently a serious illness and so forth, and still be a valued member of the community if all those things had happened when I was 28. The reason I say that is because I had an accumulation of a track record that allowed people to believe that, you know, okay, we're not going to throw this one away just because they've had a few years of unproductivity or lower productivity as a result of personal issues. Not everybody has those advantages, and that's why I say my advice is not from my own, you know, look at what I did and do that. Don't do what I did, because I really do believe that given the pressures in the job. It is extremely hard to maintain work-life balance. But my advice would be choose life, choose your life over your work. Because at the end of the day, and I don't think I'm at the end of the day yet, but I can see it in the distance. At the end of the day, that's what you need to have is your life. You don't, I mean, the work's great, but it's not your life. That said, it's difficult. And I guess here again, I'm going to sort of make an appeal to senior level people, deans and department heads and whatnot, to think about how difficult they make it for people that have, especially women, that have whatever issues to succeed in our field. It's not an easy thing.
Thank you, Pat. I think that's very insightful. It has to be done, but it takes a lot of courage to do that. Just getting a bit off track, I know you love research. Research has been your life. And for me personally, a seminar at the school doesn't cut it unless you are there. You usually ask the best questions. So my question to you is, what do you do for fun other than research? What I know you travel. What really excites you?
I do love traveling.
Yes.
In recent years, I've been had an advantage of having been the editor in chief at CAR. Is I suddenly became really popular to be invited to give talks at various places where I think the main objective was for people to pitch their papers to me that they were trying to submit to the journal. But never mind, I got to travel extensively and see lots of interesting places. As you know, I spend a month every year or so, except for this year, in Greece. That's one of the ways that's kind of my downtime. Sometimes when I've been there, as when I was the editor in chief, I had to keep working while I was there, but most years in my life that I've been going to Greece, I've been able to pretty much turn off when I'm there, and that is blessed. It is just blessed. You may also know that I'm an avid swimmer. I'm missing that very, very, very much in 2020. I keep looking for opportunities, swimming pools that might be open and accessible to me and so forth, but that's not going to happen. Of course, when I'm in Greece, I can swim in the sea, and that's great, but not here in Ontario, not Lake Ontario. I don't think so. And certainly not in the wintertime. No, indeed. Yeah. So that and of course my family, my daughter, my husband. So those are my downtime kind of activities.
That's great. And this is something that we ask sometimes during interviews, but I've always wanted to ask a faculty colleague, if you could have 3 people over for dinner, anyone, who would it be? Anyone alive or dead? Anyone?
I'm gonna stew over that one because I've got a couple of them that I would like to propose, but I'm gonna wait.
Okay. And before I pass it over to Liz and Christine, I just want to say, Pat, that amongst the 4 of us here, I've known you the longest. I remember when we met, when you came here, and we were so happy to have you here. I must say that you've been a role model for us with your expertise and professionalism and integrity and collegiality. So you really inspired us. You're much admired and much loved. So I wanted to say that. And over to you, Liz.
Thank you so much. Let me just say, Ranjini, before Liz goes into the next thing, thank you very much. I think we met before I came to Waterloo. did you not interview at York when I was on the faculty
Yes,
list?
yes,
And that
you're
was,
right.
I think, our first time meeting. But in any case, I was happy to come and join the group at Waterloo, ecstatic to join the group at Waterloo, and that you were part of it and so forth. So
Great.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Pat. Okay, over to you, Liz.
Okay, so prior to your departure this summer, you passed me the baton as the graduate officer. Not sure I'll be thanking you for that. It's a little bit more of an administrative burden than I had counted on, but I'm enjoying it nevertheless. We have a great group of PhD students here with us now, and hopefully more to come in the years ahead. And so I wondered if you could, given your experiences as an editor, referee, and just as a massive contributor to our profession over the years, if you could offer some words of advice to our incoming PhD students, our upper year PhD students, and our PhD students who are about to embark upon their first faculty position.
Okay. Well, you asked in the context of my being an editor, referee, and all of the rest of that. And so certainly those young people are, if they're in the PhD program, they're in the process of learning how to evaluate research, how to read research, how to produce research ultimately. Those that are going into the launch phase are perhaps past that and more involved in journal and reviewing and so forth in actual papers. I think that somehow in our education process, we overemphasize the critique part of evaluating research and maybe underemphasize the appreciating the value in a paper or an idea. In other words, we encourage our students to find fault with the things that they're reading as a way of understanding the research process and so forth. And I think we do a less good job. This is all very impressionistic, but this is the impression that I've gained, a less good job of having them understand this is the outcome of somebody's careful thinking about a problem in which they had to make a lot of trade-offs, some of which, may have been, choosing the less bad of two bad alternatives or two non-ideal alternatives. So instead of asking them to find the faults in papers, I wish that we could instead help them to understand a sort of a building process of what this paper brings in terms of some new insight or some new contribution. And yes, it's not perfect, but it is a step. And it's a valuable step for whatever reason. This is something that in the course of looking at, especially, I guess it's a commonplace for people to remark that if you want a really harsh review of a paper, you send it to a junior referee, because they're going to write, everything's wrong, everything needs to be fixed, and no, there's no contribution here. And so maybe this is something that can only be learned after you've produced a few papers yourself, a bunch of papers yourself, to know about all those hard decisions that had to be made that maybe weren't made in an ideal fashion, but you did the best you could with what you had. So this sort of thinking, I don't know if I can summarize it with, be generous or be kind when you are evaluating the work of other people. That said, don't expect it from the other side, because I don't think that we're going to say we're going to change the world in this one conversation. So.
Okay, thank you. That's also good advice as I'm teaching a PhD course to remind our students of that in the course of their development.
Well,
Over to
Pat,
you, Christine.
I think we've grilled you long enough, but on behalf of this group, on behalf of the whole school, I want to. Oh, Pat,
do I get to get my dinner invitations?
Yes, of course.
Okay, it was sitting there in the back of my brain, and
Oh, yes.
three names. It's hard to get down to just three, because there are so many good candidates. So here's my list: Eleanor of Aquitaine, Golda Meir,
Okay.
and Millie Dresselhaus.
And who is that? Who's the last person?
The last person I think she's still alive. I'm not certain she's still alive. She was a faculty member at MIT in physics when I was there. She was one of the first tenured women. When I say one of the first, she was one of the first at MIT anywhere. She might have been the first in physics. Brilliant researcher who also, had 4 kids, was, wife and mom, and sort of did it all just by being very brilliant. She had time for especially young women, and mentoring, and she provided a really great role model in an atmosphere that is, so boys club. It was over the top boys club at that institution. I hope they've changed since those days, but at that time. The other two, but they're for Golda Meir. She was part of the army that fought to get the state of Israel established. She, of course, became prime minister, but before she became prime minister, and she was just a member of the legislature, there were, in the early days, fears about danger, particularly danger to women, and an idea was floated in the legislature that perhaps we should have a curfew on women after dark so that they will be kept safe. And her response was, if we're having a curfew, it's on the men. The women are doing nothing wrong. And there ended the debate. So somebody with this sort of idea who did for her country, for her nation, what needed to be done, and kept a clear head and a focus. I think I would like her. And I'm fascinated by Eleanor of Aquitaine because she kept fighting wars even when she was imprisoned in a tower. She kept fighting wars against her husband after her husband imprisoned her in a tower. And I just think that is the coolest, the coolest sort of thing. So.
Thank you, Pat. That will be a very, very interesting discussion over dinner.
Yes, you'll be up a long time, late into the night.
Better have a lot of wine, I guess.
I think your choices reflect what a strong person you are, Pat. Ranjini, I think, summarized it quite eloquently, how you have been a role model for many of us here. And it's important because, there still are challenges for women at the highest levels at full professor. Still less than 25% are female. And so we need role models like you. And I'm confident that you'll continue to inspire women in this profession, but this has been very, very helpful, and we are very grateful that you shared your insights today. So, thank you from us and from the school. Thank you so much. And we hope to see you, continue to see you in the workshops going forward. So we can, yeah, good. That we can keep hearing those good comments that you make. And also we'll watch with interest in terms of what you do next. But thank you so much, Pat.